bipolar disorder, and third one is autism. These three words are super negative. And I used to have a friend. She dropped from her school because she has their major depressive disorder. This is kind of depression, and it's all over people who are around you. People nowadays are under super big pressure, and I know some of you, most of you can handle it pretty well, but people who can't handle it very well, they will become sick, and they become their mental ill patients. So today our topic is integrating these mentally ill patients into our society by dispelling these social stigmas. Now my colleague Gloria will talk about what are the social stigmas.
So the definition of a social stigma is an extreme disapproval and discriminating behavior directed towards a person or group on socially characteristic grounds. So in terms of a mental illness, this is the prejudicial attitudes that people have against those with mental illnesses as a result of their psychological behavior. So this used to be on a slide, but these are some of the social stigmas that people hold around those with mental illnesses, and that is that they're hard to talk to, that they're dangerous, and that their diseases are self-inflicted. So where do these social stigmas come from? In the recognized medical model, the mental health problems are on par with physical illnesses, which typically result from medical dysfunction. And so this implies that people with mental health problems are not normal functioning individuals. We need to use the word patient for those with mental health problems, which is another word charged with undesirable stigma. Another place social stigmas come from is social comparison. So we tend to evaluate our own abilities by comparing ourselves to others, and we do this to define ourselves, but also to reduce our own uncertainties or to feel self-enhanced. And so when someone with normal mental health meets someone with a mental illness, they may see that person as lacking something that they do have, and so they see themselves on a different level, and that creates this disparity. The media also plays a critical role in informing the public, and unfortunately it tends to play a large role in perpetuating this stigma. It tends to over-report negative stories and creates a link between mental illness and violence, when in reality only 3 to 5% of violence in the country is attributed to mental illnesses. And in addition, the news seems to perpetuate this idea that mental illnesses are not treatable and that they are permanent diseases, but that is not true at all. So these three factors help to perpetuate the social stigma, but here's an observation to consider. There are some specific words that have been labeled to describe the prejudicial attitudes that we have towards certain groups of people, such as racist or homophobic, and over time these words have become charged with heavy negative stigma. And so there's no word that describes someone who shows prejudice towards those with mental illnesses. So perhaps we should start.
Now that you know more about social stigmas and what they come from, it brings us to the question, so what? What's the impact that social stigmas have on the mentally ill, and what can we do about it? For one thing, keep this statistic in mind. Out of 10 people who have mental health problems, 9 of them think that social stigmas have a negative impact on their lives. The impacts of social stigma rear its head through one of two mechanisms, the first being social stigmas. This is an external factor. Basically, in society, when stigmas impact the way we think, it impacts the way we treat those who have mental health illnesses. These main 4 ways are, number 1, withholding help, number 2, intentionally avoiding them in social situations, number 3, practicing coercive treatment, and number 4, creating segregated institutions to contain the mentally ill. Now, it may not be as blatant as this in our day-to-day lives, but actions like this do impact the mentally ill. And this is important to note because arguably the biggest barrier to recovery from mental illness is not the mental illness itself, but actually the way that society treats those with mental illnesses. Impacts of mental illnesses also rear its head through internal factors, which is self-stigmatization. When those people with mental health problems start to internalize the effects that the perceptions that society has of them, it becomes a daily stressor for them. And so it becomes an added burden to the already existing symptoms that they have. As a result, it reduces their self-esteem, self-image, and also increases their tendency to exclude themselves from society. All of these things together have a host of other effects. The first one is that it increases their unwillingness to engage in society, and so they won't go for jobs, they won't push themselves for good education, and they won't bother to form or maintain close relationships. The second effect is that it causes anxiety and depression. The third is that it becomes a barrier for them to get help. And so because they think of it as an embarrassing part of them, they don't want to go get professional help. And this, of course, hinders their recovery. And we can see from here the effects of stigma against the mentally ill are far-reaching. And this is why we need to find a way to mitigate its effects. Perhaps we can do this by working harder to both reduce the prevalence of stigmas and to more actively integrate the mentally ill in society. How? My colleague Siva will address this matter.
All right, so there are many ways to integrate the mentally ill into society. One of the first steps of integration is to dispel these social stigmas. Stigmas distance relationships between people. Such strong segregation is also very counterproductive in treating the mentally ill. And regardless of the technological and medical advancements that we have made and that we pride ourselves in and saying, oh, we have used that to treat the mentally ill, they all are rendered useless when we continue to perpetuate these social stigmas and treat and negatively perceive the mentally ill. So how do we reduce these social stigmas? With education, with reduction of personal attribution, and with using our active voice. 1, education. One of the biggest impetuses to stigma is ignorance of the biological symptoms and social conditions that perpetuate the way the mentally ill are perceived in society negatively. Educating others about mental illnesses, symptoms, causes, social factors are ways to recharge how we think and how we perceive these individuals. Open and enduring dialogue concerning the mentally ill will also reduce discrimination and will also serve as a remedy to reduce the social stigma. Number 2, reduction of personal attribution. According to David Penn and Shannon Couture of the World Psychiatry Organization, the reason why there's persistent derogatory treatment of the mentally ill is because we perceive them as being personally responsible for their condition. Recharging this thought process of saying that they're controlling their condition or that they're personally responsible and redirecting it to saying it's uncontrollable and the causes are external will reduce its discrimination and will extricate the blame from these individuals. So I've mentioned learning and I've mentioned perception, but one of the biggest ways we can reduce stigmas is through action. We use our voice because our voice helps to combat these social stigmas directly and effectively. Using respectful language and not words such as retarded or crazy will definitely help to reduce the negative imagery surrounding these individuals. The language definitely matters. Creating a work, school, and social environment of inclusivity that reduces boundaries between people is also a way to reduce these social stigmas. Advocating this trajectory against stigmas and against the discrimination in places such as the school board, health organizations, Congress, will create a strong public momentum. This public momentum will then become powerful, reverberated, and resonant. We say that society as a whole has to start this momentum. I say it has to start with one individual, because the voice of one inspires an army. Finally, and most importantly, the biggest way to integrate people, including education, perception, and action, is through our empathy. Because if we do not empathize, then the ties that bind the people in the human condition will wither away.
Personally, I can relate to a lot of this because my own mother is schizophrenic. It has been one heck of a ride, but it is a ride that has led me to the person that I am today. It has molded me, motivated me, and strengthened me through trials and tough times. And I can tell you, it isn't easy dealing with people who have irrational thoughts and behaviors. And sometimes, I can admit it, it's a little bit scary. But these behaviors aren't something that we can easily change, even through modern medicine today. Not all problems can be cured. So what we must do instead is focus on prevention. Focus on how to eliminate this kind of stuff from happening to people in the first place. For even though mental illness is genetic, ultimately, a lot of it is determined and triggered by the environment. Thus, this leads me to my next point. There is more stigma than substance of the mentally ill than you be. People suffering these problems are human like us nonetheless, and they should be treated equally and the same. When we become big enough to understand how critically important it is for us to empathize with those who are mentally ill as well as their loved ones, we can actually begin changing the world. And I know this sounds a little bit heavy, But think about it. When's the last time you really reached out to someone and really showed them that you cared and tried to understand their situation? We don't have to exactly understand everyone's different experiences because we all come from different places. But when we try and we stick out our hand and we just try to show our love, this kind of care can be more healing than